forecast information. So how am I going to be able to, for instance, compare the actual revenue from my orders with the forecast that's in Oracle, or excuse me, in Excel? I've got a little over half an hour to do that. So to accomplish this, we simply go through the steps in our guide here. So first we're going to say, what are the data connections that we want to be working with? So I mentioned order data, so we'll start with that. Now, of course, this could be on any machine in your network, so you specify the server where that particular data source is available to you. The database we're going to be working with, and here I'm using Northwind, which you may recognize as the standard sample database that comes with SQL Server. And I point that out to illustrate the fact that this is just raw data. There was no pre-processing that went into preparing this. And once I've given the credentials, I click the refresh button, and the system reads the database and tells me that these are the tables available to me from that database. Now, in addition, I mentioned that I also have an HR system, but the HR system's not in the default SQL Server. The HR system's actually storing its information in Oracle. And by the way, if you have some data source that's not on our list, choose unknown. And if you've got ODBC connectivity to it, then we can talk directly to it via ODBC. But in this case, I want Oracle using a native Oracle connection. I'll put in the credentials. Click the refresh button, and my system will return a list of the various schemas that are available to me within this, through these Oracle credentials, and I'll choose the HR schema, and then it will return the tables available through that. All right, so now we've got our order management system, we've got our HR system. I mentioned we also want to look at a forecast, and the forecast was not in a relational database, it was in Excel. So I'll select Excel, I'll select the specific spreadsheet I want to work with, which in this case is a simple tabular sales forecast. And now when I click refresh, it shows me the sheets available to me. So now I've got my three data sources, and at some point I'm going to want to deploy the system I'm building. So I'm going to create one more data connection called deploy. I'll put it on the local machine in the deploy database. I'll check to make sure that it's available to me. It's not, and that's just because I had the cap lock key on. Now when I click test, I see that my data source is available. So now I have access to all the low-level information I need for my data connections. The system allows you to limit by user or role what each person can do within this environment. So the user with the rights to set up data connections, I'm done with that expertise now. That person can go and work on other things, and the rest of these tasks are done at a higher level. So for instance, if I go to step 2, manage events, well, here are my various data sources. I can start by saying I want to pull the orders out of my order data. So I say I want to create a new event, which I'll call an order. Now by default, when I create an event, it's given a field event time. If you're going to calculate metrics on events, you want to know when they happen. But how do I map this back to the database? Well, if I click on the drop-down list here, I get a list of all of the tables that were available to me through my order data connection. I'll start with my orders table, and now it's just drag and drop mapping. So I can take my order date and use that as the event time. Now, because this is one system, which goes from raw data to metrics to dashboards, as opposed to first using the ETL tool to build a warehouse from which you build data marts, from which you build cubes that are then used by analysis software, that has many pieces that have to be kept in sync. And once you build it, it's relatively hard to change it. In this environment, because it is one tool that goes all the way through, it's designed to be incrementally changed. So you deploy the things that you need today, and if tomorrow you decide you need another dimension or another data source, it's very easy to add those. So what you do in defining one of our systems is only to pull out the fields that you actually need to support your dashboard. So we're going to move the minimum amount of data necessary in order to generate what you need for your dashboard. So we give you a way of specifying what are the metrics you care about and what are the dimensions you want to see them broken down by. So from my orders, I might generate metrics such as number of orders or average order size, or in this case, we'll look at revenue from orders. And if I want to see my revenue broken down by geography, I'll drag out just the fields I care about, such as maybe city and country. The first challenge I run into is that the actual value of an order is not in this table, this orders table. The actual value of this order is contained in the line items underneath this. So the challenge is, how do I relate an order to all of its line items without having to write any SQL? And And we do that by clicking on the Insert Relation button and specifying that I want to relate my orders to something in my line items or order details table. And then I'm given a graphical interface that allows me to specify that the order ID of the line item has to equal the order ID that I see in the original order. So again, you need to understand what are the fields you care about and how they relate, but you don't have to write SQL to do that. Once I've done this step, I now have access to all of the line items that went with my order, and I can just drag out the fields I need, such as unit price and quantity. Now, of course, we did this without writing SQL, but somewhere there's going to be a database administrator that wants to understand what's going on under the covers. So I can always look at the Queries tab and see the SQL that's generated against this. Now, the next challenge I run into is that I now have the information on the order, with the exception that I mentioned that I also want to be able to look at the revenue broken down by aspects of an employee. And in this orders table, I've got an employee ID, but what if I need to go out to my Oracle-based HR system to link this to the information about that employee? How do I go about doing that? Well, in this case, if I want to relate this to something in another data source, I say I want to insert an external relation, and I can relate this to my HR system, pulling from that things from my employees table, and once I've specified what I want to link this to, you'll see that to me, the developer within this tool, it looks identical to as if it was all within one database. I can simply say that the employee ID from my HR system has to equal the employee ID from the original order. Now, actually, when I went to put this demonstration together, I noticed that SQL Server indexes employees starting at 1, Oracle at 101, so I need one additional piece of logic where I'll actually say it's the employee ID plus a constant of 100. Now, here it's a very simple adding a constant of 100, but the logical abilities here allow you to create complex conditionals and composite joins whenever you might need to specify the appropriate logic for your situation. But now that gives me access to the employee data from the HR system, and I can drag out a field such as last name. And of course, just because I call it last name in the database doesn't mean that's what I want it to be in my event. So I'll rename this to employee. And there's also the ability to create data transformations here. Maybe I really want it to be last name, comma, first name, or maybe there's other things I need to do. We've got a graphical tool for defining data transformations, derived fields, that's just as easy as everything else you'll see within the process. So we saw a moment ago that I can look at the generated SQL, the auto-generated SQL. Well, now that I'm going against two databases, we can see the SQL that's running against either one of these. And what we will do is we will keep the SQL as simple as possible to keep the load light on the back-end systems, and we'll do the work, for instance, of joining these two pieces of data in a service that we provide. So it's done in memory, but not on the database server, so we're offloading work from that database system. You also have the ability to test this from here at any point. So if I go into my test mode and say advanced test, let it run for a little while to gather some data and then stop it. And now if I look at the events that we're building, I notice I see city, country, unit price, and quantity, and I also see a name, not an ID. So I can see at this point that we have dynamically joined the SQL Server order management information as well as the Oracle-based HR system to generate this order event. So that's building my order event from my order data. But I mentioned that I also have a forecast here, so let's quickly create one more event called forecast. This is going to be based on the sheet here, and I'm simply going to drag out the date as my event time, and then what is the sales target for that date. So a very simple event. So now I've built an order event and a forecast event. What do I do next? Well, in our system, the answer is pretty much always the same. You go back to the guide and just follow through the steps. So I've done step 2 and build out certain events, so now I'm up to step 3, event mapping. Now, I just mapped from multiple data sources and multiple tables into my events. Why am I at another mapping step? And the reason is fairly important. On the left, we see real events. So this would be an event that maps to some real or actual data source. But if I drag it to the right, it copies it and creates what we would call an archetype event, or a standard or a canonical format event. In a case like this, it's very simple. You simply drag from the left to the right and you get a copy. But in most of our customers, it's not this simple. And most of our customers Well, they don't have all their orders in one order management system. Maybe they acquired a company and have a second order management system from that company. So we might create order 2 mapping to some other real data source under the covers. And then I can map order on the left